I hadn't been in town for more than 6 hours when I saw the hikers. My name is Owen Merrick, and 3 weeks ago I inherited my grandmother's 80-acre property in the hills outside Ridgeway. She'd passed quietly in her sleep, left everything to me in a handwritten will. The land was remote, wooded, bordered by state forest on 2 sides. No neighbors close by, or at least that's what I'd thought. The moment I pulled off the highway onto the old access road, I saw them. A couple in matching windbreakers, trekking poles in hand, walking along a clearly marked trail that cut straight through the eastern meadow. I slowed the truck and watched them disappear into the tree line. Then I saw the sign. A wooden post with a carved plaque that read Ridgeway Trails maintained by Ridgeway Heights HOA. Beneath it, a smaller sign listed trail rules, hours, and a reminder to respect the natural habitat. I parked near the old farmhouse and got out. The trail wasn't subtle. It had fresh gravel, wooden railings along the steeper sections, and even a small footbridge over the creek. Someone had put money into this, a lot of it. I walked the perimeter that afternoon following the trail markers. The main loop was nearly 2 miles long, winding through meadows along ridgelines and past a scenic overlook that had a bench and a donated plaque thanking the HOA for preserving community access on my land. I went back to the house, found the lockbox my grandmother had left with her attorney, and pulled out the deed. Every acre was hers. No easements, no shared rights, no mention of trails or public use, just her name and now mine. That evening, a silver sedan pulled up the driveway. A man in khakis and a polo shirt stepped out, clipboard in hand. He knocked twice, then opened the screen door without waiting. "Excuse me," I said, stepping onto the porch. He smiled like we were old friends. "You must be Owen. I'm Richard Talbert, Vice President of the Ridgeway Heights Homeowners Association. Just wanted to welcome you to the area and go over a few community guidelines." "I'm not part of any HOA," I said. He chuckled. "Well, technically, the trails cross into what we consider shared recreational land. Your grandmother was very supportive of the project." "She wasn't. I know because she would have told me." He adjusted his glasses. "We have documentation showing she approved the trail expansion 4 years ago. I'd be happy to send you a copy." "Do that," I said, "and while you're at it, send me proof she signed anything." He hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, we'll get that sorted, but in the meantime, please don't interfere with trail access. We have over 200 members who use it regularly." I didn't respond. I just watched him get back in his car and drive off. The next morning, I went to the county recorder's office. A clerk named Angela pulled up the property records. It took her 15 minutes to locate the trail easement filing. She printed it and handed it across the counter. "This was submitted 4 years ago," she said. "It grants the HOA access for recreational trail development." I looked at the signature line. It was my grandmother's name, but the handwriting was shaky, uneven. My grandmother had arthritis in her hands by then. She couldn't write like that. "I'm going to need a certified copy," I said, "and I want to know who notarized it." Angela flipped the page. "Looks like it was notarized by Jennifer Talbert." "Any relation to Richard Talbert?" She shrugged. "Can't say, but I can pull her notary registration if you want." She did. I thanked her and drove straight to my grandmother's attorney, a man named Gary Finch who'd handled her estate. He reviewed the document in silence, then set it down with a sigh. "This isn't her signature," he said. "I'd know it anywhere. She signed dozens of documents with me over the years." "This doesn't match. Can you testify to that?" "Absolutely. And I'll do you one better. I have her medical records showing she had limited motor function in her dominant hand by that time. Writing a signature like this would have been physically impossible." I leaned back. "So someone forged it. Looks that way. And if the notary is related to the HOA leadership, that's conspiracy." I left his office and called a friend of mine, a civil litigator named Marcus who owed me a favor from years back. I explained the situation. He didn't even hesitate. "Send me everything. If they've been using your land without permission and profiting from it, that's trespass and unjust enrichment. We can file for an injunction and damages." That night I walked the trail again. This time I brought a camera. I photographed every sign, every structure, every improvement. At the overlook I found a donation box mounted to a post. It was locked, but through the slot I could see cash and envelopes. I took a photo of that too. The next morning Richard showed up again. This time he had a woman with him, tall, severe, wearing a blazer that looked too formal for a Tuesday. "This is Monica Hale," he said. "She's president of the HOA. We wanted to discuss the trail situation before things get contentious." "They're already contentious," I said. "You built a trail system on my land without permission." Monica smiled thinly. "Your grandmother gave verbal approval. We acted in good faith." "Verbal approval doesn't mean anything without a signed easement, and the one you filed is forged." Her expression didn't change. "That's a serious accusation. It's a serious crime," I said. "And I've already spoken to an attorney. We're filing an injunction to close the trails immediately." Richard's face went red. "You can't do that. We have members who depend on this trail." "Then you should have built it on land you actually owned." They left without another word. 2 days later I received a letter from the HOA's legal counsel. It was a cease and desist demanding I stop interfering with trail access and threatening legal action if I continued. I forwarded it to Marcus. He laughed. "They're bluffing. Let them try." We filed our own motion that afternoon. Immediate injunction, trespass damages, and a request for a full accounting of any funds collected through trail usage. The hearing was set for the following week. In the meantime, I started talking to people in town. A woman named Carla who ran the local coffee shop told me the HOA had been pushing the trail project hard for years. They said it would increase property values, she said. But a lot of folks thought it was just Richard and Monica trying to justify the dues they kept raising. Did they ever say whose land it was on? She shook her head. They made it sound like it was public land or something the HOA owned outright. I thanked her and kept digging. At the hardware store, I met a man named Pete who'd lived in Ridgeway his whole life. He remembered my grandmother. She was a tough lady, he said. Didn't take kindly to people telling her what to do. She ever mention a trail project? He snorted. Hell no. She told me once she'd shoot anyone who tried to put a public path through her woods. She was joking, but barely. That was all I needed to hear. The day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Half the HOA showed up, most of them glaring at me like I'd burned down their clubhouse. Marcus stood beside me, calm and collected. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Callahan, reviewed the filings in silence. Then she looked up. Mr. Talbert, do you have proof that Ms. Merrick gave informed consent for this easement? Richard's attorney, a younger guy in an ill-fitting suit, stood. We have the signed document, Your Honor. Judge Callahan held it up. This document, the one with a notary stamp from Mr. Talbert's wife? The room went quiet. The attorney stammered. That's coincidental, Your Honor. The judge wasn't having it. I'm granting the temporary injunction. All trail access is suspended pending a full investigation into the validity of this easement. If it's determined that the signature was forged, this court will consider further remedies including restitution. The gavel came down. Richard looked like he'd been punched. Monica just stared straight ahead, stone-faced. Outside, Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. That went better than I expected. Now we wait for them to crack. They cracked faster than I thought. 3 days later, Jennifer Talbert's notary license was suspended pending review. The state notary board found that she'd notarized the document without the signer present, a direct violation of her oath. With that, the case fell apart. The HOA's attorney withdrew. Richard resigned as vice president, and Monica, facing potential fraud charges, agreed to a settlement. The terms were simple. The HOA would pay me $85,000 in damages for unauthorized use of the land, dismantle all trail structures within 60 days, and issue a public apology. But I had a different idea. I met with the interim HOA board, a group of residents who'd had no idea what Richard and Monica had been doing. They were apologetic, embarrassed, and genuinely concerned about losing the trails. A lot of people loved that trail, one of them said. It wasn't right how it got built, but it meant something to folks. I thought about it for a long time, then I made them an offer. I'll lease the trail corridor to the HOA for $1 a year. In exchange, you maintain it, you insure it, and you pay me a small access fee for every non-resident who uses it. They agreed immediately. We drafted a legal lease, recorded it with the county, and reopened the trails a month later. But this time, there was a new sign at the trailhead. Merrick Trail open to the public, $5 day pass, proceeds benefit local land conservation. I hired a part-time attendant to manage the fee box and keep records. Within 3 months, the trail was bringing in steady income. Hikers came from surrounding towns, some even from out of state. The fees added up. I reinvested most of it into the land, repairing fences, clearing invasive species, adding a small parking area with proper grading. The rest I donated to a local conservation fund in my grandmother's name. Richard and Monica were never charged criminally, but they left town within the year. The HOA restructured, elected new leadership, and started operating transparently for the first time in a decade. I stayed on the property. Fixed up the old farmhouse, brought in some solar panels, and started keeping bees on the southern slope. On weekends, I'd walk the trail myself, watching families and retirees and college kids pass through land that had been in my family for generations. One afternoon, an older man stopped me near the overlook. He had a camera around his neck and a kind face. "This is a beautiful spot," he said. "Thank you for keeping it open." I nodded. "It's worth protecting," he smiled. "Your grandmother would be proud." I didn't know how he knew her, but I believed him, because she would have been proud not of the fight, but of what came after, of the land being used the right way on the right terms by people who respected it. That evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey and watched the sun drop behind the ridge. Somewhere out on the trail, I could hear voices, laughter, the sound of boots on gravel. It wasn't the silence my grandmother had known, but it wasn't chaos either. It was something in between, something earned. The trail stayed open, the fees kept coming, and the land, my land, finally felt like it belonged to someone who gave a damn. A few months after the settlement, I started noticing something strange. The trail traffic had doubled. On weekends, the small gravel lot I'd built was overflowing. Cars lined the access road, some with out-of-state plates. I didn't mind the activity, but I wanted to understand it, so I checked the trail logs. The day pass sales had spiked, but what really caught my attention was a spike in online mentions. Someone had posted about the trail on a hiking blog. The write-up was glowing. It called the Merrick Trail one of the best-kept secrets in the region, praised the scenery, the maintenance, and the affordable access fee. Within a week, the post had been shared across social media. Then a regional magazine picked it up. I got a call from a journalist named Stephanie who wanted to do a feature. I agreed, mostly because I wanted to set the record straight about how the trail had come to exist. The article ran a month later. It didn't sugarcoat anything. Stephanie detailed the forged easement, the HOA's misconduct, and the settlement, but she also highlighted the lease agreement and the conservation fund. The response was overwhelmingly positive. I started getting emails from people thanking me for keeping the trail open. Some offered donations. Others asked if I'd consider expanding the trail network. I hadn't planned on it, but the idea stuck with me. I reached out to a trail design consultant, a guy named Ben who specialized in sustainable recreation infrastructure. He walked the property with me, mapped out potential routes, and suggested a 3-mile extension that would connect to the state forest boundary. It would cost money, but between the trail fees and a small grant I applied for, it was doable. We broke ground that spring. The new section took 4 months to complete. It included switchbacks up a steep hillside, a loop around a hidden pond, and a spur trail to a granite outcrop with a 360-degree view. When it opened, I held a small ribbon cutting. The interim HOA board attended, along with a few dozen residents and hikers. There were no speeches, just a quiet acknowledgement that something good had come from something ugly. That winter, I got a letter from the state attorney general's office. They'd completed their investigation into the notary fraud. Jennifer Talbert had been fined and permanently barred from holding a notary commission. Richard Talbert had been named as a co-conspirator, but avoided charges in exchange for cooperating with the investigation. The letter thanked me for my cooperation and noted that the case had led to stronger oversight of HOA activities statewide. I filed the letter away and didn't think much about it. But a few weeks later, I got a call from a woman named Diane. She lived 3 counties over and had just inherited property from her father. She'd found an HOA easement on file that she didn't recognize. She'd read about my case and wanted advice. I spent an hour on the phone with her, walking her through the steps I'd taken. I gave her Marcus's contact information and told her not to back down. She called me a month later to say the easement had been voided. Her father's signature had been forged too. That conversation led to others. I started hearing from people all over the state who were dealing with similar issues. Some had HOAs claiming rights to their land, others had developers or neighbors encroaching on their property. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew the process, and I was willing to share what I'd learned. By the end of the year, I'd helped a dozen people challenge fraudulent easements and illegal land grabs. Some of them won, some of them settled. A few are still fighting, but all of them had one thing in common. They refused to be pushed off their own land. The trail kept growing. I added a second parking area, installed a composting toilet near the trailhead, and hired a local high school kid to help with maintenance. The fees brought in enough to cover costs and then some. I reinvested the surplus into the property, buying better equipment, improving access roads, and funding a small wildlife survey. One spring morning, I was walking the ridge trail when I came across a family having a picnic near the overlook. The kids were running around, the parents were laughing, and for a moment I just stood there watching. The father noticed me and waved. "This place is incredible," he called out. "Thank you for sharing it." I nodded and kept walking. But his words stayed with me. Sharing it, that's what it had become. Not a fight over ownership, but a choice about stewardship. My grandmother had protected this land her whole life. Now I was doing the same, just in a different way. That summer, I got a call from the county parks department. They wanted to discuss a partnership. The idea was to create a regional trail network that connected my property to the state forest and several other private parcels. It would require easements, legal agreements, and a lot of coordination. But it would also protect the land in perpetuity and bring in sustainable funding. I met with the parks director, a woman named Laura who'd been in conservation work for 20 years. She laid out the proposal. The county would help fund trail construction and maintenance in exchange for public access. Property owners would retain ownership but grant recorded easements that couldn't be revoked. It sounded complicated, but Laura walked me through every detail. I took a week to think about it, then I signed on. The first phase of the regional network launched the following spring. My property became a key link in a 25-mile trail system that drew hikers, runners, and nature lovers from across the state. The access fees stayed in place, but now they were managed through a county fund that supported trail maintenance and land conservation. I kept my role simple. I managed my section of the trail, worked with volunteers, and made sure the land stayed healthy. On weekends, I'd still walk the loop, checking for erosion, clearing fallen branches, and talking to the occasional hiker. One afternoon, I met an older woman sitting on the bench at the overlook. She had a thermos of tea and a worn paperback. "Mind if I sit?" I asked. She gestured to the space beside her. "It's your land." We sat in silence for a while, watching the clouds roll over the valley. Then she spoke. "I used to hike here years ago," she said, "back when it was unofficial. Your grandmother caught me once, told me I was trespassing." I smiled. "That sounds like her." The woman laughed. She wasn't mean about it. Just firm, but she also told me the land was worth protecting. Said people didn't respect things they didn't have to work for. She was right about that. The woman nodded. "I think she'd be glad you're doing this, charging a fee, keeping it maintained. It makes people pay attention." We sat a little longer, then she packed up her things and headed back down the trail. I stayed on the bench, watching the light shift through the trees. The land had been a fight, but it had also been a lesson. About boundaries, about respect, about what it means to protect something without locking it away. The trail fees kept coming in, the hikers kept coming back, and the land, my land, stayed exactly what it was meant to be. Wild, open, and worth the effort.